Hi, everybody. All right. Hard to follow Mark Brackett, right? What a fantastic speaker. Okay. What's this called? From the headlines. Dialing back phones in schools. See what we did there? Dialing back phones in schools. Do kids even know how to dial? I'm not even sure. So this is a rip from the headline story. It's controversial having phones in schools. There's a lot of debate. It's distraction. It's impeding academic performance. It increases bullying. That's one narrative, right? We have anxious families, anxious teachers, anxious kids. Teachers may want the phones out. Families want to be able to reach their children. And I think what's interesting about this conversation is really what's best for kids too. I think that's the honest debate that we want to have, and this isn't one of those this answer is right and that answer is wrong necessarily. And we know that kids need support. They're growing. We want them to grow, to have agency, to understand, and to have autonomy. And so, to me, it's how do we do this together? What kind of dialogue can we have? What can we learn together? So I have two incredibly accomplished people to speak about this issue. Kate, let's start with you. So you're a veteran mathematics teacher. Thank you.
Yes, that usually traumatizes people when I announce I'm a high school math teacher specializing in geometry and statistics. Enjoy.
So
there won't be any math questions today, right? I'm not ready for that.
No, I will absolutely not do that to anyone.
Maybe a quiz at the end.
But I think, we've seen certainly in the course of my career, going from a space where there really wasn't much use of cell phones into sort of this really submersive space where we went through the pandemic and technology kind of took over education, and now having to rebalance that and figure out what's the right developmentally appropriate, I think, usage of technology. And I think for us as educators, there's so many pieces that we're concerned about in terms of balance, making sure that we're doing things that make sense for kids, but we're doing this on an island, because I think that's also part of the important piece we always want to keep in mind, is that in schools, we can't make decisions exclusive. They need to be inclusive decision-making, that people understand why we're doing what we're doing, what practices make sense, and recognizing that you really can't put in a K-12 policy, because what's right in kindergarten is not right in 12th grade. Mm-hmm. And so developmentally appropriate responses that acknowledge where kids are in that growth space is, I think, really key to this conversation. I think we can agree, kindergartners have cell phones. I have colleagues who have had to confiscate or tell a 5-year-old to put their phone away. So it's a reality. But we have a lot of compliance, actually, in elementary school. So there's not a lot of kickback when you tell a 5, 6, or 7-year-old, honey, you got to put your phone in your backpack. Nobody really kicks back. Middle school's kind of the landmine, but that's developmentally appropriate. You think about your average 11 through 13-year-old, and all they want to do is challenge you. And so that's a space where we have to really negotiate harder about what the right solution is. And I think when we talk about high school students, we're really trying to build towards that autonomous, well-developed human that we can send out into the world and live their big dreams. And we need to develop skill sets that allow for that to happen. So that's, kind of the landscape and how we approach this. But we know that you can't do this alone. Sitting in a classroom by myself, I can kind of derive what I think is the right thing to do, but that's not a successful programmatic approach. We need to think about this globally, what our communities want, what our families need, what our children need, and what our educators need.
I understand that a lot of this thinking is behind what you did as an intervention in your school district. Could you just say a little bit more about how that shows up then?
So in our middle school, we had a lot of disruptive behaviors, a lot of challenging things that were going on, and a lot of stress points for kids, adults, families, and everybody was pretty unhappy with kind of the climate and culture. And we had a really great administrator who came from the classroom pretty recently, and he said, I think we can do better. But what I was really proud of is that they didn't just drop a policy and a program into the school on day one and go, okay, we're going to do yonder pouches in the middle school, and every kid's going to put their phone in this pouch, and off we go. They took the time to work with families and with kids to say, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? What do we hope to accomplish? What's the problem we're trying to solve here? And it was fascinating to talk to kids because they could articulate it. They could tell you, well, yeah, you know, we're kind of having challenges and we're kind of, you know, getting aggressive and we're not communicating well. And so having the time to have those conversations, to hear parents talk about, we're really concerned, how does access to our child look in this environment? How does, you know, unfortunately we live in a world that has school shootings, right? We do, and to deny that is unfair. So what would that look like? I mean, we had to have those dialogues so families could understand how would we approach those issues, what assurances would they have? And then when we really were able to roll out the program, people understood what was going to happen. And I think that really developed well and gave everybody voice and understanding. And it really has functioned as one of the more successful rollouts of any program we've seen. But that had a lot to do with the front end work of sitting, listening, communicating, and making sure everybody felt engaged in that work.
Kudos to you for bringing all the stakeholders in, especially the kids. I feel like in these conversations of cell phones, yes or no, rarely are the kids consulted. So I think bringing them on equal footing is really wonderful. So Carrie, you lead a national organization, the National Parents Union, and we're in a climate where there's a whole range of opinions and even, you know, regulation, let's say. There's attempts to ban schools from having phones entirely. There's state bills around this issue. How do you navigate that? You have 50 states, DC and Puerto Rico, I think, on your map. And how do you manage all of it?
Well, I think the most important thing, and the thing I really appreciated from the approach that Kate was just talking about, is actually bringing parents into the conversation. Mm-hmm. So there's some understanding around why we feel the way we do about technology, or frankly, a whole host of issues, instead of just an assumption. Too often we have wide-scale policy changes that are just done to us and not with us. And then we wonder why things don't work, they fall flat, there's resistance, there's acrimony, there are people who are organizing with pitchforks at the school boards, and it's because we make these blanket decisions without having these conversations with parents and families. So that's the work of the National Parents Union. We have 1,600 pockets of parent power in every corner of this nation, of parents who are coming together because they want to be a thoughtful partner and a critical stakeholder, because we are. These are our children. And we do bring a different lens, because parents don't have students, we have children. And so we're always looking at this from a more comprehensive view and mindset. So when it comes to this particular issue, I think, you know, you've got to bring context into it. A lot of folks are talking about Jonathan's data, which, you know, frankly, I'm a mother of 5. I have 5 little boys who are in 5th through 10th grade. Man, okay, I know, clutch. Yeah, 5th through 10th grade. It is complicated and smelly, and there's a lot of feelings. There's a lot going on in my house. But cell phones are both a wonderful and terrible thing going on in our lives right now. To me, I make it very clear to my kids that, you know, this is a tool for mommy to be able to find out where you are, what you're doing, for us to talk back and forth. Anything else we do on the cell phone is extra. And when confronted with the data and understanding the negative impacts that you can see that can come with this technology, I had an immediate visceral reaction saying, oh my gosh, we gotta do something. We gotta stop this, we gotta ban. Because when you look at the negative impacts, of course that's gonna hit you, like, I wanna protect my child. But in going out and having these conversations with parents and families across the country, the real concerns around safety, the real concerns and complications around the fact that modern American families look at these devices as being critical communications tools because we have blended families, because we're trying to give our kids autonomy. We're hearing so many conflicting messages about this while trying to keep our kids safe. So I don't think that we can just look at one piece of data presented by one person. We have to understand the entire context of everything that is on our plates as parents as we make these decisions. So around cell phones, like we have done national polling where we have gone out and asked the questions, like, how do you feel about these devices? How do you feel about social media? When did you give your kid a cell phone? Was it the right decision? And what we have discovered is that parents view these devices as very helpful. They don't want them taken away from their kids. They don't want them locked up, but they view they view social media very differently. They are deeply concerned about the impact of negative content and the emotional impact it has through bullying and everything else. But in terms of it being a positive vehicle for us to maintain that communication channel, 89% of American families are in support of the devices being used so that we can maintain those connections.
What I love about this part of the conversation too is how you're being very inclusive about the voices that are at the table, not just the kids, but also I think, especially in your work, you're always trying to reach the less represented voices in the room, right? The marginalized and underrepresented communities who maybe are not as engaged in their schools or their school districts' work. That's probably a problem writ large in the country generally, but maybe perhaps around issues like this where there's a lot of attention and a lot of anxiety, maybe you're getting more of that. I'd be curious to hear maybe if you have some examples, some concrete examples of where you were able to make that happen, or where some insights that came from folks who may not already be at the table that much led to some kind of breakthrough or thing where it maybe changed some minds within the work you do.
Well, I think that as we talk to families and we understand, I do think that there's a very real context around the families don't look like they used to 50 years ago. They're very blended. There are a lot of unique circumstances, and figuring out how to, I think, navigate that. My school district is very diverse. It is ethnically diverse. It is socioeconomically diverse. And so that's why it was so critical to talk to all the different stakeholders, including the kids, because in some of those cases, we have kids who are really very adult in their families and carry a lot of adult responsibilities. And so understanding in some cases we have kids who are, taking care of their siblings after school, and that is a security and lifeline. And recognizing, okay, well, how are we going to support you to do that? Because we recognize, and building in the tools to say, okay, if there is something you need to do, here's how we're going to do it. And making that okay to ask for that help, to recognizing up front that that was an important piece of this puzzle. It's this concept that all or nothing and no, we can't have anything, that wasn't going to make sense in this environment. You had too many complexities. And so we didn't know where the tension points were necessarily going to exist, but we knew there were going to be. And so building an opportunity for discussion, opportunity for a child to bring that forward legitimately, that it didn't have to be mom and dad, I think was also really critical to recognizing that the world looks very different for our students today. And so we have to acknowledge the reality.
So the issue that everybody keeps coming back to, though, is that it's somehow undermining academic performance. Oh, yes, and I feel like that's lurking in every room, right? And I know plenty of teachers who wish that phones would never be in the building, never mind in the classroom. At the same time, we have a collective goal of supporting these kids' growth, independence, and autonomy, like I said at the beginning. We also want to build relationships and trust. How do we do all those things? Like you had a very nice developmental pathway you laid out at the beginning, but if we want to graduate kids who are ready for the world, what are we aiming for? Well,
I think it's interesting that we look at it from that lens, that it is interrupting, academic instruction. We are, for some reason in the United States, just absolutely addicted to this antiquated model of delivering education. It has been the same way for the past 190 years, where you have, frankly, one white woman at the head of the classroom in front of 25 to 30 kids, lecturing endlessly, regardless of what we have learned about the brain science, child development, that this is not the most effective way of delivering education. We keep doing it the same way. We have learned so much through the last 190 years, through technology and evolution, that we should actually be, I don't know, perhaps looking at these devices as being a gateway to opening some new doors and some new experiences in terms of how we deliver education. Instead of just fearing them, banning them, pushing them off to the side, acting as if like our kids are somehow going to be able to put up a wall, and then when they graduate from 12th grade, we're going to hand them a cell phone and expect them to navigate modern American society. It's 2024, and that just does not seem reasonable to me. But I do want to say this. For me, there were two particular instances that really opened my mind around the perspective of parents around this. And I think we'd be remiss if we didn't acknowledge them. Number one is listening to the lack of trust that parents really have in terms of schools being able to effectively communicate with us if there is an issue. Whether we like it or not, in our society in the United States, we have become comfortable with the idea that classrooms filled with children are going to be murdered every single year. And we see it happen over and over and over again, and we have not done enough to address that issue. So to ask parents to just simply put that to a side and don't worry about it, just call the office if you think so, like that is wild. We have never had effective communication with parents. We haven't fixed that problem. And until we do that, like, I'm sorry, like, we're not going to be comfortable with just hoping they figure it out. That's not going to be okay. And the second part is, you know, we have a chronic absenteeism issue in our schools. And yes, that impacts students in classrooms, but it also impacts teachers. And I will tell you, one of the most powerful conversations I had was actually with my 5th grader who has a 504 and had a teacher who was out and had been out for several weeks. And he had a substitute that had not read his 504, and he's anxious and he's sitting in the bathroom. And what did he do? He went and he got his cell phone, he called me and said, "Mom, will you do a breathing exercise with me, because I don't think I can sit in there and I'm gonna run out of the building." And so me as a mom, where I am always told that I'm supposed to be a part of the education team, I am able to step in and de-escalate him and make it so that he can go back into the classroom and be a partner with an educator who's trying to help my son, but maybe hasn't read his 504. So, you know, until we can deal with some of these surrounding issues, the intersectional issues, I don't think that parents, the majority of whom are not ready to have these devices locked up and away from our kids, are going to be on board.
We're going to have a wrap up now. It's a cliffhanger moment here where I wish we had like 5 more minutes, or maybe 20 hours more time to talk about this. I would say yes to all of these things, and schools are stuck in time. They're also bearing the weight of the world, especially after this pandemic of teacher shortages, teacher stress and burnout, decrepit infrastructure, you know, the gamut. We can come up with a list of reasons that schools are overtasked with the work of supporting our young people. In that environment, we're also trying to create these sensible ways of accommodating today's new media environment. I think it seems like the two of you are important leaders in this conversation going forward. Thank you so much for spending time with us here today. For the conversation.
Thank you.